Good morning. So let's talk about vectors today. See, most of you would be, doing kinematics, projectile motion, and stuff like that. And vectors, you would have found out, play a very important role in these topics. And in fact, throughout your physics course, vectors are very decisive. So good knowledge of vectors is very, very important. So practice vectors a lot. Today's topic is about components of a vector. Now, this vector could be a force vector, this could be a displacement vector, and you know that vectors can be resolved as rectangular components in x-axis and y-axis. Now, one of the myths which the students carry is that when you resolve the vector in x and y, the way you broke the vector or resolved the vector in x and y axis now gives you a scalar. That is not true. What you got in x axis as a component of the vector is also a vector. What you got in y axis as a component of the vector is also a vector. It is not a scalar, right? So when you break down your vector in components, the components are also vectors. The second important point you must understand, and this is more to do with a small tip, when you break down the vector or resolve the vector in x, y, currently two-dimensional, and this could be three-dimensional also, right? X, Y, Z. The components, for example, if a vector is in first quadrant, and you can see the slide here, right? If a vector is in first quadrant, and you resolve the vector in x and y, the x is also positive and the y is also positive. So the components carry a sign which is dependent on the original location of the vector. So for example, there is a vector in fourth quadrant. In fourth quadrant, you have x is positive and y is negative, right? So this chart, gives you, immediately pictorial view of the situation. So whenever you're doing vector resolution, please assign correct sign to the component, which is also a vector, right? So if you have a vector, for example, in third quadrant, and you do resolution, you get an x component vector and you get a y component vector. Obviously, you can see the x component vector and the y component vector. Both are negative, right? So do your vector practice, especially the components, because if you're in 11th standard, next 2 years, you will have every chapter, you will face vector resolution or vectors. And if you're in 12th standard, you would have realized, a lot of chapters expect you to have good knowledge of vectors. So go through this slide. It talks about components, and I will send out some questions on practicing the components of the vector. Thank you very much for your attention. Please subscribe to my channel if you like this, and send me your feedback. Thank you.